Shalom and welcome to the European Report. Here we are in the European Parliament in the heart of the European Union, and in today's programme we'll be discussing the alarming rise of Jew hatred across the continent of Europe, and we'll be asking what can be done to combat this. In today's programme I'm joined by Tomas Sandell, the founder and director of the European Coalition, and a great honour for this programme to have Katharina von Schnurbein, who is the European Coordinator for Combating Anti-Semitism on the programme, and also our first Romanian representative in Doru-Frunzulică, who's a Romanian MEP. So welcome to the programme. Thomas, it's good to have you back on the programme, and I know that recently that you've been in France showing solidarity with the Jewish leadership amongst the rise of anti-Semitism in France, in which we've seen a 74% increase in anti-Semitic instances. Yeah. So can you share with us your recent trip to Paris and also the other great work that you're doing on behalf of Israel through the European Coalition for Israel?
Well, thank you, Simon, and it's true that the last few weeks have been quite eventful in all of Europe. And we just happened to be in the eye of the storm for the last 2 weeks, having made a visit to Paris during the large demonstration in Paris against anti-Semitism, but also then in Poland just a few days later, meeting with Polish leaders in that nation who have great concerns that Polish-Israeli relations should stay intact. But also, perhaps most interestingly and appropriate for this program, that I made my first ever visit to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And after being involved 15, 16 years in this work, finally the time had come, and of course that raises many questions, and I think some of them I'd like to discuss in this program.
Absolutely. And Katharina, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the programme. And firstly, can we all say on behalf of this programme that you're doing a fantastic job in doing what you can to combat the rise of Jew hatred across Europe. And you know, you're an inspiration to so many people, including many people in the Jewish communities across Europe who look up to you. So my first question to you really is, why is this issue of Jew hatred, personal to you?
Well, I think it has been with me for a very long time. Actually, it goes back also to my family, to my upbringing. It's always been important at our home to transmit the responsibility that we have, in particular as Germans, but also as Europeans, with regards to ensuring that there is no tolerance towards Jew hatred, and to contribute to that what we can do. And I have to say, at the moment, I see the explosions of anti-Semitism that we see across Europe with a great worry. In fact, today, the European Commission reacted to the carnival figures that paraded in Aalst in Belgium and depicted Orthodox Jews with sacks of dollar and basically paraded the streets of Europe in this Stürmer-like anti-Semitic images. I think, to see that again was shocking. And we see all these different forms of anti-Semitism at the moment. This very old one, rarely shown so bluntly, to be honest. But then also other forms of anti-Semitism, those that actually were created only after the Holocaust. So the idea that we cannot forgive the Jews what they have done to Europe. So, the anti-Semitism that is not there despite of Auschwitz, but because of Auschwitz. And then also the idea that the existence of Israel as a state is a racist endeavor as such. And as we know, on the one side, criticism towards Israel, towards the politics of Israel, like that towards any other country, cannot be considered anti-Semitic. But when it comes to the existence of Israel and the right to self-determination for the Jewish people, then this is clearly anti-Semitic when it's put into question. So at the European Commission, we've been trying to really look at all these different aspects. we have endorsed the IRA definition on anti-Semitism that looks at all these different aspects, and we use it as a non-legally binding basis for our work. And that then has been picked up by the European Parliament, has been adopted also by the European Parliament, and was endorsed in a declaration by all 28 member states in December last year.
Excellent. So just one question following on from that. Can you see a day when we see EU member states actually endorse the International Holocaust definition on anti-Semitism, making it legally binding?
Well, I think that actually the document as it is at the moment is a non-legally binding document. It is not written as a legal document. It's important also to see, we have already legislation when it comes to incitement against hatred and violence against certain groups of people, and these laws need to be applied. So we can already cover a lot of hatred towards Jews by simply applying these laws, also, by the way, online, which means perpetrators that post illegal hate speech online should also be taken to court.
Excellent, thank you. And Doru, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the programme. And coming from Romania, and Romania is probably the most important country right now in the European Union because you're hosting the presidency. So a two-way question for you. Firstly, are you surprised at what we're seeing in Europe today? And this is a huge increase in anti-Semitism across Europe. And what can Romania do in terms of holding the presidency of the European Union to try and counter that rise of anti-Semitism?
In fact, I'm totally surprised looking on what is going on in Europe with all these anti-Jewish actions, hatred speech, even murder, which is terrible for the 21st century in Europe. Where are the European values that we defend? I'm asking myself, and lots of people are asking themselves, what we can do. Romania took important steps. Romania in 2017 adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition on anti-Semitism, and Romania is probably one of the unique European countries that have a law to combat anti-Semitism. It's a very important law where the punishment goes to 10 years of prison. It was adopted in 2018. And this is what we are saying to other members of the European Union, that first of all the European Union states should have to adopt the definition of anti-Semitism, and then, to adopt a law. But the best thing is what I promoted very much, also here in the European Parliament, to have a common European Union law on combating anti-Semitism. This is what we need, a common legislation that should have to be binding for all member states. And this has to be promoted by the European Parliament and by the European Council in order to have a common European Union law on combating anti-Semitism.
Fantastic, so encouraging. So thank you so much for that. And Thomas, I know that you've been in France recently and attended that solidarity rally on behalf of the Jewish community in France. And the French's Interior Minister said that we've seen a 74% increase in the past year in anti-Semitic instances in France. We've seen 80 Jewish graveyards desecrated. We've seen an attack on a French Jew that was murdered over a decade ago. And why, in your opinion, do you think that France is such a hotspot for this rise of Jew hatred, and what are your concerns?
Well, I think the obvious answer first would be to say that France has the largest Jewish community outside of Israel and the United States. It also has the largest Muslim immigrant community in Europe. And when we look at the cases of violent attacks, we also know that there's a disproportionate high number from that community. Having said that, I'd like to go back 120 years in history, where there was no such community in Paris, and still note that anti-Semitism was just as prevalent in the 1890s in Paris. And this is, of course, this was the time of the Dreyfus trial. this was the time where an Austrian journalist followed the trial and came to the conclusion that the Jewish people need their own homeland. His name was Theodor Herzl. So I think that we need to be self-critical as Europeans as well. As I said, the obvious answer is to say, like in the case against Alain Finkielkraut, that it was a well-known criminal radical Islamist who was the perpetrator. But even without this phenomena in France, we know that the problems goes much deeper. Why this is, I think that's the issue we've been, or the Jewish people have been contemplating for centuries. And one have to go much deeper to really try to even find some indications of answers. Let me just conclude by saying that for us it was very special to visit the Grand Synagogue of Paris, where Dreyfus was married, where Theodor Herzl gave his first speech about the Jewish homeland, and meet with the Rabbi Moshe Sebag, who was obviously very concerned. And I think the lesson that he also wanted to convey is to say this: yes, there are the perpetrators, but the greatest challenge and the threat to the Jewish community in Europe today is the indifference. So when he himself had been attacked on an open street, he said, well, all the French people around him, they turned a blind eye, they just walked away. And I think this is a wake-up call, as you rightly said, for those who want to stand up for European values. What are we going to do when we see our neighbors, our brothers and sisters being harassed and attacked in this way? And I think this is where we need the courage to stand up.
Absolutely. And Katharina, we're seeing, particularly in France and in Belgium and other European countries, including my own country as well, in Britain, a large number of Jewish people making aliyah out of fear of a rise of anti-Semitism across Europe. Now, in the 6th of September last year in 2018, the Council of the European Union announced that they were going to develop a common strategy approach to protect European Jewish communities. Can you outline the strategy that was discussed then and how that's been implemented now?
Yes, I think you're very right to say, that in a way this aliyah is worrying, because it has always been worrying when Jews felt that they could no longer live in Europe. So from that perspective, the trend we are seeing there is I think, a threat and a wake-up call to Europe's democracy. Often when I talk to people who make aliyah, when you ask them why, because it's not so easy for Europeans sometimes to live in Israel either, they say, yes, but the state is on my side. And this declaration was a sign to say Europe is on your side. Europe is on the side of the Jewish people. And in that declaration, it indeed started with regards to ensuring security of Jewish communities and Jewish premises, and to ensure that the costs for these security measures are not dumped on the community. But it is much wider. It includes education, not only about the dark times of Jewish history in Europe, about the Shoah, but also about the contribution of the Jewish people throughout history to Europe, and to what anti-Semitism therefore also means again today. So a holistic approach to education. It also says that with regards to integration measures, this knowledge needs to be transferred to newcomers to our society. I believe actually that it is a door opener for them to fully participate in our society. Then there is an endorsement of the IRA definition recommended to the member states. We also have the request to have better data collection of anti-Semitic incidents in order to have a fuller picture of how the situation is, and to have training for law enforcement agencies based on the IRA definition to ensure that anti-Semitic incidents are actually being detected properly and therefore also properly followed up, and we have a proper victim support. So these are just a few aspects, but they are important steps, and I think every member state will see in how far these things fit into their own system. As you know, security, education are member states' competences, and therefore it's important that member states have the ownership and also the say in where they are going. But we have created now a working group with all member states where we are going to support them in the implementation of this declaration and in the creation of national strategies in the wider context of their strategies against racism.
Fantastic, thank you. And Doru, can you talk more about how successful this new legislation that's been implemented in Romania in combating anti-Semitism, and what lessons can the EU learn from Romania's experience, and what can we teach those MEPs in this Parliament that actually breached the International Holocaust Alliance definition on anti-Semitism?
In fact, coming back a little bit to your former question, because I should have to say more about the Romanian presidency of the Council of the European Union, we already hold an important conference within the European Parliament with lots of representatives, in fact, the leadership of Jewish organizations from Europe, United States, and also the participation of the European coordinator to combat anti-Semitism, and also from the United States, from the Department of State. Conference that was opened by the Romanian Prime Minister, Mrs. Viorica Dăncilă. It was a conference how we can better work together to combat anti-Semitism in the European Union. And allow me to tell you that I attended also this conference. It was a successful conference by all means. And then, you know, definitely some lessons learned are the following. We need to work together more. We need to learn from each other, I mean from each and every country. Yeah. At the same time, you know, we have to implement the existing legislation that sometimes is not well or is not implemented, legislation on racism and xenophobia, to combat racism and xenophobia. And, you know, at the same time, to implement what it was decided. For example, remember the last Council decision on declaration on 6th of December 2018 to confront and to combat anti-Semitism, and, attention, to better cooperate between, you know, a better cooperation among the member states on security and defense issues in order to better protect the Jewish communities in Europe. This is very important because at the end it's also a cooperation on security and defense issues among, you know, the intelligence organizations, among the security, you know, institutions of the member states.
Excellent. And Thomas, I know that the issue of Jew hatred is something that you personally have taken great responsibility for, and as an organisation this is something that you campaign on globally. When we look at the Jewish community, we realise that here they are an integral part of European society and been here for thousands of years, and we owe our Judeo-Christian heritage to our Jewish friends. Now, in light of the fact that we see Jewish schools and synagogues protected by the military with machine guns, we see Jewish schools having barbed wire around them and fortresses around them to protect the Jewish community. Do you think these measures in terms of that the EU want to adopt in terms of recognising the International Holocaust Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism, working to introduce existing legislation and implementing that legislation is enough to reassure this very, I would say, very scared community at the time of rising Jew hatred across this continent?
Let me first congratulate both the Romanian presidency and again Katharina von Schnurbein for fantastic work that you have done. Is it 2 years now? Three. Sorry, time flies. Three years. But you have to ask yourself the question, in a society where you have to send your children to a school where you need military personnel to protect you, is that really the society where you want your children to grow up? This is what I hear when I speak to my Jewish friends. So legislation can go so far. I'm not saying we should not legislate, we shouldn't implement legislation. This is given. But how do we change hearts? How do we uproot this 1,000 years of Jew hatred? That's a difficult one. What I would say, and what I saw in Poland, which was very encouraging when I was there just 2 weeks ago, is that realizing that Poland was 10% Jewish before the Second World War, and now there's hardly, very, very small community left. What the Poles have realized is that, we're missing something very essential of what Poland is, what our culture is. So they have started to organize Jewish festivals in these cities where, 70, 80 years ago there was a vibrant Jewish community, but today there's not even one single Jew. My point is to say, and I heard Katharina say it a few minutes ago, we need to also look at the other side of the coin and say, listen, this is, as I said so many times, not simply something that we have to tolerate. This is something that we have to be thankful for, grateful for, the Jewish contributions to our culture and civilization. It's almost, I made a note here to myself, maybe we should have a Thanksgiving Day for Jewish culture in Europe, where one particular day where we would emphasize and find illustrations of what would Europe be today without the Jewish contributions. And I think people would really wake up and say, listen, this wouldn't be France anymore, this wouldn't be Poland anymore, this wouldn't be Europe anymore. That's how essential these Jewish contributions have been. And I think it's only when we turn things around and really say, listen, this is worth celebrating. That's when we can also find this change of attitudes from hatred to appreciation and respect and even love.
I like your idea. Let's hope it progresses. And Katharina, I want to thank you for the job that you do in raising and tackling what is a very, very difficult issue and reassuring Europe's Jewish communities. But in terms of our viewers watching this programme today, what ways can they support you in your fight against Jew hatred?
Well, I think the most important instrument has already been mentioned by Tomas before. It's speaking up whenever you see something, when you hear an anti-Semitic remark. Of course, getting involved when you see an anti-Semitic act. And that takes civil courage. And we are in Europe, we don't have a history of civil courage. But I think, Elie Wiesel once said, what hurts the victim most is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystanders. Mm-hmm. And I think that is true, and it's not true not only with regards to anti-Semitism, it's true with regards to any form of degrading another human being. And we need to rekindle that kind of civil courage that will allow us to stand up when it's difficult. I, for example, very much like the writings of Bonhoeffer, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He's inspirational because he went to the very last step. In the end, he was killed for his conviction. And it is good, I think, to feed our minds also with this kind of literature and biographies to see it is possible to stand up. And usually our situations today are much less dangerous to us. It's a question of maybe speaking up when a friend, hopefully not a friend, but an acquaintance makes an anti-Semitic remark and becoming the party pooper, maybe. So what? I think this is what we have to aim for, and this is how we have to maybe also equip ourselves in what we do and what we read.
Thank you so much. And Doru, I'll give you the final word of the programme. How can our viewers get behind brave and courageous MEPs like yourself who are making a brave stand against the rise of Jew hatred across Europe?
Myself, I have a long history of friendship with Jewish people, coming back to my childhood at home in Romania. As Elie Wiesel was mentioned, he was born in Romania in 1928 in Sighet. And then here in the parliament, immediately after I arrived, after 2014 elections, I joined this very important working group on combating anti-Semitism. And I'm urging, and I urged lots of colleagues to join this important working group where we meet, you know, we discuss also with non-governmental organizations, with institutions, also with, let's say, other bodies from Israel, from Europe, from United States, and so on and so forth. And we try, you know, to promote this very important, let's say, activity to combat anti-Semitism, because at the end, you know, to combating anti-Semitism, we are promoting our common values.
Absolutely.
Because the values of Europe are Judeo-European values. These are our common values, you know, based on, you know, understanding among people, you know, promoting a normal life without threats, also based on family values, also on peace, on solidarity, on liberty. These are very important common values.
Thank you much, Doru. Thank you all for being my guests on today's programme. And I just want to thank you for watching today's European report here in the European Parliament on this very, very critical issue of the rise of Jew hatred in Europe. And we can all make a difference by standing up against it wherever we see it. So thank you for watching today's programme.